Welcome back, everyone. Excited to dive into something pretty deep today. We're taking on Ursula K. Le Guin's The Ones Who Walk Away from Omelas.
Ah, classic.
Yeah, and alongside that, we're going to look at the raw material. Two very different sources, you know. One's a short story, the other, well, it's this whole cosmology from a supposed extraterrestrial being.
Definitely a unique pairing.
It is.
Yeah.
But both of them really get you thinking about happiness, sacrifice, choice, the big stuff.
hmm
Will they fit together, though? Or will we find ourselves with, like, a total clash of ideas?
Yeah, I think that's what's going to be really interesting here. Can we find a dialogue between a human-centered ethical perspective, like we see in Omelas, and a more cosmic one offered by the raw material?
Right, okay, so first things first.
Yeah.
Omelas. Got to set the stage. So imagine, like, the perfect utopia. Festivals, happy children, beautiful buildings. Le Guin really, like, draws you in with this vivid picture.
Yeah, and just when you're totally immersed in this idyllic world, she pulls the rug out from under you. All of this utopian bliss hinges on a really dark secret.
It's a single child, right? Kept in absolute misery. And, like, that suffering is the price everyone else pays for their happiness.
The ultimate ethical dilemma.
It is. The way Le Guin describes it, it's gut-wrenching.
Yeah.
It really makes you ask yourself, if I were an Omelas, knowing this, would I walk away?
It's a question that stays with you long after you finish the story. What are we willing to ignore? What compromises are we making for our own comfort and happiness?
It's a question for every generation, I think. So that's Omelas. And then in comes this completely different thing, the Ra material. Channeled messages from this entity called Ra, talking about densities, spiritual evolution, all this cosmic stuff.
It can definitely feel like drinking from a fire hose at first. It took me a while to even begin to wrap my head around it.
Oh, me too. It's dense. But it's also remarkably ambitious, the way it tries to connect science and spirituality, to offer this, like, framework for understanding where we fit in the universe.
That's one of the things that really draws people in. It's not just some abstract spiritual idea. It actually tries to ground itself in a kind of cosmic logic.
So where do we even start trying to bridge this gap between Omelas and the raw material?
Yeah.
What's the key takeaway from the raw material that we should be focusing on?
Well, I think the concept of harvesting is going to be really important.
Harvesting. Like crops.
Not quite, though there are some interesting metaphorical parallels there. In the raw material, harvesting refers to how souls move into higher levels of existence. They call them densities, based on their spiritual growth.
Hmm. Okay. So is it like if you've been good, you get harvested into a better place?
It's not really about being good in a traditional sense. There are actually two main paths in the raw material: service to others and service to self. And those paths determine how a soul evolves through these different densities.
Service to others, service to self. Okay, I think I'm starting to see a potential connection to Omelas here. Both of them, in a way, are dealing with this idea of a hidden cost,
Right.
whether it's the suffering of that one child or some kind of cosmic sacrifice for advancement.
You're picking up on it exactly. And it's interesting how Omelas makes this cost very immediate, very visceral, while the raw material takes it to this huge cosmic scale, something that plays out over lifetimes, even across multiple incarnations.
Okay, so here's a question that popped into my mind. Could the people who choose to stay in Omelas, the ones who benefit from that child's suffering, could they justify their actions through this service to others idea from the raw material? Are they serving some greater good, even if it's totally messed up?
It's a really thought-provoking question because on the surface, it might seem like they could make that argument, but Omelas is also so clearly about individual moral responsibility. Those who walk away, they're saying no to that greater good argument. They're rejecting the whole system.
But the raw material also talks about interconnectedness, right? That our actions all have these ripple effects. Wouldn't staying in Omelas, even if you hate it, still be contributing to that system, to that web of suffering?
Absolutely. It adds a whole other dimension to the Omelas dilemma. Maybe those who stay, even if they think they're benefiting the majority, they're actually generating some pretty heavy negative karma, a consequence that extends far beyond the walls of their seemingly utopian city.
Whoa.
Oh.
Okay, so we've got individual morality, cosmic interconnectedness, and now karma thrown into the mix. My head is spinning a little bit, but in a good way. It's like we're taking this fictional dilemma and adding all these layers of meaning.
And that's why I think exploring these two sources together is so powerful. It pushes us to think beyond simple answers, beyond easy categories of good and evil. We're forced to confront these really complex questions about choice, not just on a personal or social level, but on a cosmic level too.
This is deep stuff, definitely a lot for our listeners to chew on. And we're just getting started. We're going to take a quick break, but we'll be back soon to dive even deeper into these fascinating connections between Omelas and the Law of One.
Welcome back to our deep dive exploring Omelas and the Law of One.
We're really getting into the nitty-gritty now, trying to see how these two very different things, a fictional utopia with this really dark secret and this cosmic framework for existence, how they connect and maybe even inform each other.
And to really get those connections, I think we need to unpack some specific concepts from the raw material.
Okay, yeah, let's do it. I'm still wrapping my head around all this. Densities, for example. It's one of those things where, full disclosure, I start to feel a bit lost. Like, is this science fiction?
I get it. It can be mind-bending for sure.
Hmm.
But try to think of densities not as physical places, like different planets or dimensions we can travel to, but as levels of consciousness. Each density has its own set of lessons, its own ways of experiencing and interacting with the universe.
So it's not about physical realms.
hmm
Then what's the difference between these densities and where do we fit into all of this?
Yeah.
Are we at the top? The bottom?
Oh, we're definitely not at the top. According to the raw material, there are 7 main densities. And we humans, we're currently in 3rd density.
Third density. Out of 7. Sounds like we've got a long way to go.
We do. But don't underestimate 3rd density. It's actually super crucial. 3rd density is all about developing self-awareness. It's where we grapple with free will, where we start to make choices that shape our souls, learn about love, wisdom, all those essential human things.
Makes sense. So when we graduate from third density, do we just poof, suddenly find ourselves in a new dimension?
It's not quite so instantaneous. It's more of a transition, a process of harvesting, as Ra calls it, based on our spiritual growth and the choices we've made while in 3rd density.
Harvesting, okay. So thinking back to Omelas, is it possible that the people who choose to stay in Omelas, knowing about the child and all that, are they maybe stuck in a third density mindset?
Right.
Like they can't see beyond their immediate comfort and pleasure, even if it's based on something terrible.
That's a really interesting point. 3rd density often eye us about material concerns. It's about self-preservation, a kind of limited view of interconnectedness. So you wonder, are they even capable of grasping the bigger picture?
And those who walk away, it seems like they're acting from somewhere else. Could that be a sign of a 4th density awareness?
Yeah.
Even though they don't have the language of the raw material to explain it?
Walking away from Omelas, yeah, that could very well be a 4th density move. 4th density is about compassion, about empathy. It's about understanding that we're all connected and seeking unity. And to reject that system, even without knowing what you're walking towards, that takes a lot of courage.
So even if they haven't read the raw material, they're intuitively aligning with the law of one, right? By refusing to participate in a system built on suffering.
Exactly. And it really points to a kind of moral evolution, a recognition that true happiness can't come at the expense of another being's well-being.
Okay, but here's what I'm wrestling with. Ra also talks about service to self as a valid path, right? So could the people who stay in Omelas, who directly benefit from that child's suffering, could they be on a twisted version of that path?
That's a dark interpretation, but I think it holds up. It makes you realize how even a path that's framed as service can be distorted, taken to an extreme where it becomes all about personal gain at any cost.
So their comfort, their supposed utopia, it's all driven by selfish desire, even if they dress it up as for the greater good.
It's a chilling possibility, and honestly, it's something we see in our own world all the time, right? Societies, groups, even individuals justifying their actions while completely ignoring the suffering they cause.
It's true. Makes you wonder how much of what we consider progress is actually built on a foundation of exploitation or denial.
Yeah, and it brings us to another big idea from the raw material, free will.
Mm.
We always have a choice. We can choose to align with the law of one or not.
But how does that work if there's a universal law? Doesn't that imply a kind of predetermined path?
Well, the law of one isn't about rigid rules or commandments. It's more like a principle of unity, of understanding our interconnectedness and realizing that our actions have ripple effects. Free will lets us choose whether we act in harmony with that principle or not.
Okay, so in Omelas, those who walk away, they're exercising their free will in a way that aligns with this higher principle, this law of one.
Exactly. They're refusing to be complicit in a system that violates the very essence of interconnectedness, the idea that causing harm to one ultimately harms us all.
But what about those who stay? Are they violating the law of one, or is it more about where they are and their understanding and their development?
The raw material is all about compassion and understanding. It acknowledges that we're all at different stages of our spiritual evolution.
So it's not about judging those who stay, but understanding that they might not have the awareness yet to choose differently.
Right. And maybe even seeing their choice, as difficult as it is to accept, as an opportunity for learning and growth. Because the potential for transformation exists for everyone.
This whole discussion is making me think, if the people of Omelas are so advanced, so seemingly utopian, how could they create such a system in the first place? Shouldn't spiritual progress lead to more compassion, not cruelty?
It's a paradox for sure, and it reminds us that even advanced civilizations can fall into patterns of denial, of rationalization. They might have the knowledge, the technology, but lack the wisdom to truly understand its implications.
So even a society that looks perfect from the outside could be hiding deep shadows, ignoring the true cost of its progress.
Absolutely, and it makes you wonder, is there a point where a society's collective karma, all those choices and actions building up, become so heavy, so out of alignment with the law of one that it's destined to collapse? Like, is there a cosmic tipping point?
That's a question that's been swirling in my mind too, and it's something we're definitely going to explore further in the final part of our deep dive.
Don't miss it. We'll be unpacking the potential consequences of societal choices, both in Omelas and in our own world, and delve into what all of this means for humanity's ultimate destiny.
It's going to be mind-blowing.
See you soon.
Okay, so we're back, ready to wrap up this deep dive into Omelas and the Law of One. And wow, we've covered some serious ground, right? From utopian facades to cosmic densities and everything in between.
Yeah, it's been quite a journey. And now I think it's time to tackle the really big questions. The nature of reality, the role of suffering, even humanity's destiny. All the fun stuff.
Before we go full-on cosmic, though, you kind of left us hanging at the end of the last part.
Mm-hmm.
This idea of a karmic tipping point for societies.
Mm.
Is there actually like a point of no return where a civilization's actions are so out of whack with the law of one that it's just like doomed, heading for a collapse?
That's the million-dollar question, right?
Yeah.
And it's something that philosophers and I guess, cosmologists too have been wrestling with for ages. The raw material does suggest that civilizations go through cycles, just like individual people do. There are periods of growth, periods of stagnation, and then hopefully periods of transformation.
So it's not just about individual karma, but there's this kind of collective energy that shapes a society's fate.
Yeah, exactly. The choices a society makes, the values it embraces, it all weaves together into this collective karmic tapestry. Kind of like if you zoom out far enough, you see the patterns emerging.
I like that, the karmic tapestry idea. It's a nice visual. So with Omelas, if they just keep going with this system, built on that child's suffering, could that lead to some kind of major imbalance? Like, is the universe going to step in and say, nope, you guys got to change course or else?
The raw material definitely doesn't shy away from that possibility. And it's important to remember that in this framework, karma isn't about punishment. It's more about balance and learning.
Okay, so maybe the challenges we see in our own world, like climate change, social unrest, all of that stuff, maybe those could be seen as signs of some collective karma that needs correcting.
That's a really powerful idea, and it ties directly into the law of one's emphasis on interconnectedness. What we do individually and as a society, it doesn't just stay isolated. It has ripple effects. It contributes to the whole.
Man, thinking about it that way, it makes that choice in almost even more significant.
Mm.
Walking away, it's not just about personal morality anymore. It's potentially about influencing the fate of that whole society.
It adds a whole layer of responsibility, right? And it makes you think about the responsibility we have in our own lives, even the small things, those everyday moments where we choose kindness over selfishness, compassion over indifference. Those all contribute to this collective energy field.
Okay, so it's not about trying to be some kind of savior, but it's more like those everyday choices, they really do add up.
Exactly. And the raw material really emphasizes the power of intention. Our thoughts, our beliefs, they have an impact too. They create ripples in reality. Kind of like you throw a pebble in a pond, you see those expanding circles.
It's all connected. So I want to circle back to this whole harvesting thing one more time. How does that fit into what we're talking about here, both for individuals and for societies as a whole?
Well, remember, harvesting in the raw material, it's all about the soul's evolution through these different densities. It's about this journey towards greater awareness, greater unity, eventually culminating in emerging back with the source, with the unity of creation. Like, you could say it's the ultimate goal.
Okay, so how do we make sure we're on track for this cosmic graduation ceremony? Is it just about being a good person, doing good deeds?
It's less about being good in a kind of simplistic sense and more about aligning ourselves with the principles of the law of one. Choosing love over fear, compassion over judgment, understanding over division. Those are the qualities that propel a soul and potentially a whole civilization towards those higher densities. It's about becoming more and more aligned with that fundamental interconnectedness.
So those who walk away from Omelas, are they like demonstrating their readiness for harvesting? Their choice is kind of saying, I'm seeking something better, a better way, even if I don't know what that looks like yet.
That's a really beautiful way to look at it, and it definitely fits with the raw materials' overarching message of hope and optimism. It's never too late to choose a different path, to awaken to that interconnectedness, to say, this isn't right. I'm not going to be part of this anymore.
But what about those who choose to stay in Omelas? Does that mean they're just like stuck in those lower densities forever?
The raw material never closes the door on anyone. There's always the potential for growth, for change, for transformation. Maybe those who stay in Omelas will find their own way eventually. Maybe they'll have a moment of awakening where they realize the true cost of their comfort, the true nature of their reality.
I hope so. I really do. This whole conversation has honestly been so mind-blowing, so thought-provoking. As we wrap things up here, what's the one thing you really want our listeners to take away from all of this? If they could only remember one thing.
I think the biggest takeaway, the one that both Omelas and the Law of One really drive home, is this. We have a tremendous amount of power to shape our reality. Every choice we make, even the seemingly small, insignificant ones, they matter. They contribute to our own evolution, to the evolution of consciousness itself, and ultimately to the fate of humanity. So ask yourself, what choices are you making today? What path are you choosing? Because it really does make a difference.
Wow. Yeah, that's powerful. A lot to ponder, for sure. But that's what these deep dives are all about. Thanks for joining us on this journey through Omelas and the Law of One and all the complexities and possibilities in between. Until next time, keep exploring, keep questioning, and most importantly, keep making choices that align with your highest self, with the best version of yourself that you can imagine. We'll see you on the next deep dive.